My wife had an affair with our dog sitter. My wife, 35, lost her sister in December of 2019. Her sister had been pretty sick for a long time, but no one really expected her to die so suddenly. She was 8 months pregnant with our daughter at the time. They had just bought a new house and her folks were moving to our area since we needed help with the kids. Then in March, COVID hit. Therefore, because of all this, my wife never really got the chance to be able to properly grieve for her sister's release. Looking back, I realized the biggest mistake I made was not recognizing how deep the tension was between my wife and her sister. They never had a good relationship, they were always at odds. And whenever my wife talked about her, it was usually something that had annoyed her. Things did start to improve a bit after our first child was born in 2018. Her sister was trying to be a better aunt, despite having a lot of mental and physical health issues. But their relationship never really reached a point where you could call it good. So when her sister passed, it hit my wife and her family really hard. I tried to be supportive and did everything I could when it first happened. As time passed, my wife rarely mentioned her sister except around her birthday or the anniversary of her death. During those times, I would be there for her. But throughout the year, I didn't bring up her sister or check in on how my wife was dealing with it. This was a huge mistake on my part. Because they hadn't been close, I assumed she wasn't struggling as much as she actually was. This past December, my side of the family planned our Christmas gathering on the anniversary of her sister's death. My wife told me that it was a tough day for her, and I passed that along to my family. But they decided that day worked best for everyone. And I didn't push back, which I now deeply regret, knowing what I do. Well, after that day, my wife kept pulling away from me. We had fabulous sex chemistry, and were an average 4 or 5 times a week couple, but that came to utter halt. When I inquired as to what was happening, she stated that her sister had died, and she just wasn't really into the whole sex thing. I got it, and I did not press the matter anymore. It was not just the sex that dried up. We were one of those super physical couples who hugged, kissed, held hands, cuddled on the couch all the time. We even spooned and passed out together every night. But that all ended in the next week or two. She no longer wore her wedding ring, which was a major red flag for me, and she stopped responding, "I love you too," when I said it first. She became extremely distant. Every time I attempted to start a serious conversation regarding the glaring connection that loomed ominously between us, she would deny and tell me it was her means of coping with old issues over not being able to forgive or have closure for what had happened in hell with Celestia Castle. She promised that it had nothing to do with our relationship. She just needed time off her own emotional roller coaster. I did my best to support her, but she would not open up about it, nor tell me what was going on with her sister. I pleaded with her to speak, but she simply said that did not want to. That was how January went. By February, it was practically as though we were simply housemates who co-parented. We never really spoke, and when we did, it was just awkward, shallow small talk. At mealtimes, I would inquire after her day, work, or axe-throwing hobby, and only receive one-word answers. I would try to sit her down and talk seriously with her, maybe once a week. I knew she was still grieving her sister, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't about the ongoing grief process. This is a deeper issue between us. Each time we tried to talk, and every conversation began with me asking her to let me in, I found myself blaming us for what had happened. During this period, I learned a guy she knew predating me and we met, that he had popped into her work in the new year. She explained to me that they had a conversation, and he noticed she was sad and struggling. She racked with sobs and spilled to him all that had been going on. The truth is, however much I wanted to be that person for her, and she later told me it was easier somehow with him. Actually, this guy, we'll call him John, started helping out with a new puppy my wife brought home from work. The puppy was maniacal. We were never home because of both our schedules, and even when we were, she destroyed everything. He offered to dog sit, and between him and us, the pup was pretty well taken care of. But this arrangement meant my wife was seeing John 2 to 3 times a week when she dropped off or picked up the dog. She started staying out late and was barely around the house anymore. When I asked her about it, she would just say she needed space. I should also mention that at the end of January and the beginning of February, she started sleeping in our spare bedroom, saying she just needed more space. At this point, Every alarm in my body was going off about John and the whole situation. Our relationship was really strained, and I didn't want to add accusations of cheating into the mix, so I naively chose not to ask or push the issue. More weeks went by like this. Last week, less than 12 months after I inquired with my doctor about the vasectomy referral, they called me to say that could perform it Friday. My wife had gotten for her birthday a chef in the bush experience, where you hike out into some place in the woods and enjoy on the spot cooking by your personal chef of a 5-course menu. I told her that because of the procedure on Friday, I obviously wouldn't be able to go hiking into the woods on Saturday. She immediately asked if she could bring a friend instead of canceling. She said she was going to bring a friend of hers, Jenny, who was going through some things of her own. I said that was fine, although my mind was spiraling, thinking she was actually going to bring John. She went on the excursion and was gone all day, not getting home until around 7 p.m. When she got home, I asked her all about it, and she spun quite a tale about everything she and Jenny did and ate and how amazing it all was. She plugged in her phone and went for a shower. I have never been the snooping type, but I felt absolutely compelled to check her phone. And there it was. All of it. She wasn't even trying to hide it in her phone because she knew I never went through it. There were over a month's worth of messages between them, telling each other how in love they were, and all sorts of photos together over the past month, kissing, cuddling, holding hands, nothing explicit. But it was enough. My hands started shaking uncontrollably and my heart was racing. My worst fear had come true. I immediately confronted her when she got out of the shower and she admitted it. I asked if they had slept together, which she denied, but I obviously think she's lying about that. After the fact, I found out that the guy she said she used to work with was actually an ex-boyfriend, a detail she conveniently left out when she first told me about him. Back when they worked together, he was married, and she was single, and they had an affair that ruined his marriage. I should mention he is 10 years older than her. Now he is single, and she was married, and they had or maybe are still having an affair that ruined her marriage. This all happened just 2 days ago, and I feel so low. I don't want to say the last 10 years of my life were wasted, because they gave me my 2 children, whom I love more than anything, but for lack of a better term, it feels wasted. Now, the thought of having to start over again is just so shitty. I thought I had it the perfect life, but it's all gone. The thing that absolutely tears my heart out is knowing that now I'll only get to see half of my small children's childhood, half the holidays, just half of their lives, and it makes me cry every time I think about it, including right now. Now on to the next story, story 2. My wife, who stayed at home, had an affair thinking she'd stay wealthy, but she had no idea she'd end up with nothing after the divorce. Me and S had f***ed around each other for 5 years, 2 of those married. Out of those 7 years, everything felt right. It was like love at first sight all over again, and the longer time passed, the more she grew on me. My friends even joked about how I was a completely different person because of her. When we first started dating, I was emotionally dead and beaten down from both the army as well as how my parents raised me. Up until her, I had never let my guard down. Those 7 years were completely bliss to me, as my life had started looking like a fairy tale coming true. I managed to land a great-paying job, and for the first time in my life had some semblance of normalcy financially. That was when I fell head over heels in love with the woman of my dreams. In retrospect, I was brilliant to have created a trust for the money and properties, naming my best friend as fellow executor with my sister. I did this because I watched my best friend go through divorce and pay her half of everything she walked out with, when in reality she brought to the table a big fat goose egg. I was terrified of ending up the same way, even though I could not have imagined divorcing then. There was also a bit of security in it. I really did not have my feet set wise back then. We had a prenup going into things, so I just made sure the provisions were being met. If either of us cheated, the cheater got none of my alimony. This kind of blew me away, as I never alluded she would ever cheat. Or myself, I was having an affair, so I said okay. Our first year of marriage was all we could have hoped for. My job paid well and we were living quite comfortably. We stayed in this massive and amazing luxurious house, traveled to awesome places, We made new friends. Life was good. The second year didn't unfortunately pass as smoothly. I was so distracted due to my work, trying to land a client and boost for the company. It consumed me, and granted it wore on my energy bank a bit. It was a struggle where I insisted her that my work is our bread as she wasn't working and just being an idle stay-home wife. But at first she was cool with it. I knew it was becoming severe and I also nearly slept always, but still did the best to keep her happy. Even throughout that 6 months of stress, my needs were secondary to Rita S. My schedule was calm: wake up early for the gym, make her breakfast, go to work until 5 p.m., get home and cook dinner, then hang out with her instead of laying on my ass. And I did that for 6 months. After the client finally signed with us, I even took a 2-month vacation to her favorite place, Paris, so we could both relax. The vacation was great. We had a wonderful marriage, and I was convinced that if anything, we were stronger than ever. However, on our return home, her behavior changed. It was like she just flipped and became cold, distant, always on her phone instead of talking to me as we used to. I attempted to discuss it with her multiple times, but she chalked it up to personal problems and stress. So I dropped the issue. This went on for 6 months. Once, there was a meeting scheduled for the boss to announce some promotions. I was shitting bricks, but it paid off in a 30 salary bump thanks to landing the whale client deal. I took a few days to celebrate and head home early so I could tell my wife face to face. However, when I drove up outside of the house, there was a huge ruckus coming from inside. I immediately assumed I must be missing something. She was clearly out shopping with a friend. However, as I approached the door and heard her speak, I paused before getting my phone out and filming, because what I stepped into was my outside world imploding. She was in bed with some random unblocked music player when I said her name. The look on her face was, well, to die for. The guy ran, half naked, with his clothes in hand, out of the room, leaving her to be under a cushion. At this point, I would have destroyed all around me if it was possible, but the words had rendered too overturned by shock, thus bonked everything into silence. I went upstairs to our room, I filled my bags, and she tried saying I cheated on her. All of this isn't real. I'm just dreaming. It all seemed so ridiculous. And 30 minutes later, I packed my things and walked away. I literally walked out feeling not only release, but that the weight of all my anger was leaving me. I slept in a hotel for the next few days, pretending not to notice the calls and text messages coming from her. 3, I changed my number, and few more days after that text messaging contact lawyer, I explained the full story to him and he told me off, then made a backhanded comment about how she would only be able to get half my money because of our prenup. I filed for divorce a few months later. I heard she had to get a job just so they could pay all the bills during those months of no contact. When she handed in DM papers, that simple hoe brought her goofy ass to the conference with my attorney and signed up behind them, smiling harder than the Cheshire Cat. She'll even tell you, me cheating on is the best thing I've ever done for myself. I will take all your money and never have to work a day in my life. My lawyer and I just smiled. As he took out the prenup agreement, she realized her mistake. She could only have half my money and that was all. With that, S started to cry and ask for forgiveness, and she was just too sorry. It is only a small mistake, you know I still love you. It took her almost 20 minutes before she would sign the papers. 2 things in quick succession: the money was only enough to pay our house rent for 5 months anyway, and then she would be fucked. I tried to walk away, but she chased me down the street, saying again and again that it had been an error of judgment, a freak incident involving cocaine with some overexcited gossip, showing her in a bad light. I must know how much she loved me now, if not before. But I didn't look back. Your infidelity, of course, prompted me to move out, and fast forward today, I met someone new. We have been dating for a couple months now. I have a new, well-paying job, and I am happy again. Word has it she sat in our old house for a few months, at least until the cash ran out, now living paycheck to paycheck, just close enough to her new job. She, of course, hit me up again, but I was locale to answer her texts or calls. I am indifferent towards her. I have no remaining feelings for or against her anymore. Now on to the next story, story 3. Am I wrong for not being upset about my wife S cheating? I grew up in a pretty hippie household, and I think their influence has also infected my dating explores. I always had a free love outlook on sex and relationships. Over a period of time, I slept with a number of different people relationship from time to time, even genuinely knowing others had no intention of becoming my boyfriend. And I often had sexual intercourse with friends who would never have liked me back that way. At one point, I even convinced myself that I was aggressively pansexual. In my perfect world, having sex would be like shaking hands. I was open to being intimate with anyone who wanted to be so in touch with me. But I also recognize that is not how most people see things, and I feel that such behavior towards the fairer sex should get me charged up, even if it were legally given away. In short, while I am sexually abnormal, I have plenty of social awareness and caring heart. Therefore, I've always been comfortable remaining as just a friend with people who I find interesting, even though they have little feeling for me. However, in 2015, I met the woman who would be my future wife. She was nothing like me, no sex for her until marriage, just as serious as could be about monogamy. We met through mutual friends and hit it off really well. We enjoyed being together, and one day when Disney was making an off-color superhero movie at her place, one thing led to another, and we went to bed together. Afterward, we talked about where we stood and decided to just be friends. But through reuniting this way, or even by chance, we still got together again. We chatted again, and it occurred to me if I could be monogamous with anybody, it would be her. So I made the decision to embrace monogamy. Gradually, we got on better terms, and although the occasional women's underwear ad with multiple models called out for variety, I was as contented as anyone could possibly be. Realizing I was in love with her, I asked her to marry me. I felt the continued polyamory could not match the sense of enduring happiness in this relationship. Married late last year, we began our lives together in blissfully happy times. But last weekend, everything started to unravel. My wife left for an event and they planned to be back by 10 p.m. But just before 10, as she messaged me at that time saying that she was staying out and would crash at a friend S place for the night, I didn't think all that much of it and told her, "Okay then, good night, love you." The next day she came back, but she was different. She didn't say very much and seemed distant or to herself. I thought that had happened to be hungover, so I made her some tea and asked if she needed anything, but she shook her head and said she just wanted some time alone. Worried now that something terrible might have happened, I told her, "Okay, I'm here for you. Meet with me." But she wouldn't look at me, and I began to worry that something really bad had occurred. She was just striving to stay distant all weekend, and the worst thoughts kept going through my head that perhaps she had been assaulted or had seen something awful. She went off to work on Monday without a word to me. I work from home, and when she came home, she still wasn't speaking. That is when I insisted on stepping in. She needed space. But I was really concerned about her, and it was not like her to cut me out. We had always been a team and always stood by each other. So I said, "I need to know what is going on. This is simply not like you to shut me out." That S, when she broke down and told me what had happened, they had gone clubbing. She met a younger guy, and he was very handsome indeed. They danced. She got very drunk and ended up going back to his place with him for sex. Oh dear, I was scared of something go bad. I laughed later, but she still glowered at me as if I should go away and never come back, saying, "You were so indifferent." I told her that I just don't see things like she does. It wasn't so much that there was simply no concern for those things. I'm so sorry that she should think I could ever have forgotten about our being together. But then she got very peppery indeed, and tried asking me if I had ever had any slip-ups during the time we'd been going out. I said I hadn't, but I am forgiving. She was in a terrible state, and nobody could be kinder to her than she was being to herself. I am human. There's no point my taking this up with friends and relatives, as it is a domestic affair in that sense. But what is mean to her is increasing thunder. Yet I still can't bring myself to hate her, and it's just my nature. Am I really as much of a jerk as she says? Now on to the next story, story 4. My wife, who struggles with borderline personality, keeps cheating on me even after I forgave her for the first affair. And now she is pleading for me to take her back. I married my best friend last year. We'd been together for 8 years. It's been the most incredible and fulfilling relationship I have ever experienced. We seemed to living the perfect life. Before we moved to our dream city, we bought the most amazing pet and friend anyone could imagine. When I had the death of a pet, is the closest to bereavement I've thus far had. We were going to celebrate 10 years together and had plans for that. I even planned to take him with me during our relocation to the US, but because he can possibly survive now he is 10 years old, and this disease has proved to be incurable. Up to now, we were thinking about what kind of puppy we would get. We had sweated for nearly a year to pay off our student loans. We both had many friends and hobbies, which each of us sank our hearts into, just like I. We would do everything together, dates several times per week, road trips and holidays away and special events. We might stay up talking all night, holding each other without end, thinking about the future, to great effect anytime we were finally sick of just going over it and look forward without restriction. With countless jokes between us, we would send sexy text messages to the other all day. Our sex lives together were simply out of this world. It was pure heaven, all day and every day. We got through graduate school together, the pandemic, and all kinds of other tough life events. I work from home, so all housework falls on me with this in mind. I had to take the dog. Usually that means I've got to train him, feed, and walk Buster, so she has got no worries there. I make 4 times what she makes, but my salary enabled my wife to pursue her dream of being an artist, even though it doesn't pay anything like enough to cover rent and taxes in New York. Meanwhile, I have never made a fuss because it gives me great pleasure to look after her and help her achieve her professional ambitions. At one time, I even saw it straight through to her heart. She was having an affair with one of her colleagues, who she has only known for a couple of months, a much younger man than herself and subordinate at work. I talked with her honestly about my willingness to work out all the problems in my mind before seeing a counselor. I said that I could put up with her because our life together was wonderful. She said she was sorry, asked for forgiveness, and let me know her intentions for the future. Alin Ali found she didn't fall off when I needed her most. Last week, however, I discovered that she was still having a relationship with him. When I brought it up with her, she changed as a person. She was awful to me, screaming abusive language, saying she never loved me nor even the puppy we used to have. She said she had been pretending all along for my money, and now that she had found someone else to use, that didn't need me any longer. She admitted that she didn't feel regret or shame, and had been lying when at first supposed me she apologized, just in order to go on using my money later on, while still feeling no remorse, feeling guilty at all of having used the only system which made financial sense anyway. I should be angry with her, but I just feel sorry for her instead. I'm still going to have a wonderful life. I took my dog away and moved out. I'm still going to buy that house, but on my own now too. Furthermore, all my friends, including hers, even have shown tremendous support, and her family also gives me the same kind of aid. She's going to lose a lot, her friends. Me, in fact, she is losing both 3 sore and 6pence. In the end, possibly her job even. She is not going to be able to afford to live where she is. She was always fond of high-class entertainment, clothes, sports, good food and drink, but now she wouldn't have any of it anymore. It just doesn't make sense, but she stopped calling me, so maybe that's the end. An eternal mystery to me, how could she suddenly give up the whole life we had together? Despite all of this, I still loved her very much. When she called me later in tears and said she hadn't really meant it and would do anything to get things back together, I believed her. I told her what I said last time, that I did help in any way. In retrospect, it was almost hypnotic and strange to see those moments of the person I used to know medium, those painful outreaches were so real. But each time, just days after saying she was wrong, she'd go back stone-faced and tell me that she hadn't. It was all a lie she only said in order to manipulate me, and she had fake tears thrown in. Hurt so much this time because, after all, I had only just seen these incidents of what had been such a wonderful person for 8 years. I was so busy trying to help her through those fleeting incidents of normality that I lost track of how drastically and often she alternated her attitude towards me. Only lately did I go back and count. 15 times she flipped between saying she loved me, that she'd learned her lesson and can to wait to have me, and telling me she had no regretnesses, never really loved me and was only manipulating all along. Once, some time ago, in the meantime, she told me that when she looks back on how she treated me, she feels as if she was kidnapped by aliens and replaced with a body double. Like something out of a horror movie, she watched an evil version of herself wreak havoc on my life while being utterly helpless to fight back from outer space. But no more than 2 days later, I reminded her of this, her yelling at me again for being unsatisfactory and saying that she was busy with her affair partner, who in fact she had vowed to cut off completely just a mere 2 days previously. She told me then I do not recall saying that. There is no way I would say something so foolish unless I had no other choice. If she did say it, it was surely only in order to deceive me. For years I used to think I have never been mistreated before now. I always figured that by studying the way others treated people, I would end up being treated as a human being myself. But now, trapped in such a situation, all I can think about is what can be done for her sake. I have always really been simple to a fault, and I guess it is the first time someone close to me has taken advantage of that to keep hurting me, without any plans for making a change to this situation in sight. I filed for divorce just this week. It still seems very unreal, almost like I've lived through it all in my mind for the past 8 years. I didn't see the message when she called. I could predict what it would be like exactly now, the apologies, swearing that she'd change, the so much she loves me. A few days after her calls, it all deteriorated into shouting and abuse, telling me how I was beneath her, saying she had never loved me. Also, some people said they had heard about the original post on my TikTok. I don't have a TikTok account, so I wonder if it's just someone using one of my throwaway accounts as their own. Odd. Just FYI, if anyone is personally invested in my story, you are grieving to wrong, get some, as this is the only place online I am talking about it. Any other accounts are not mine. Edit a short update for anyone kind enough to care how I am doing. I've really been enjoying going on adventures with my dog lately, and my friends make a point of checking in every day, which is wonderful. My family's support has been fantastic as well. By my boss, I was given a month off from work. Are you an emoji? Call to action. It felt so nice getting everything sorted out again after all that time off. Surely one way or another, life just keeps moving forward, and going back to work afterwards has been great. My coworkers have been really supportive, all hyped up and checking in during afternoon break. I have also taken up some old hobbies which I gave up during the pandemic and rather made some new friends through that. Things are good. I am good. Now on to the next story, story 5. Found out about my ex-wife's affair the day she was hospitalized, and now, years later, she refuses to accept my engagement to my fiancé. If there were ever an award, I'd be a front runner for the bad ways to find out your spouse is cheating. It would not take me long before I became a regular elected member of that club nobody never wanted to join. I will never forget the sound of my former sister-in-law's voice on the phone as she said over and over that she was sorry. I didn't know what she was talking about. Finally, after I calmed her down a little bit, she told me that my wife was in the hospital and I should come home. My brain was running full tilt, trying to get more information and at the same time avoid crashing as I raced home. All she told me was that it was an attack of sorts. Then she hung up and would not answer when I called back. Some background: I met my ex, the guy who posted the question, in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's barbecue. At first, she looked almost too good to be true. She not only was incredibly pretty, but also had a shyness that held her back, which was adorable. It took a while before we officially started dating, but when finally became possible, I was so happy. Granted, she did not like our first attempt at being intimate. She burst into tears all of a sudden. It made me feel horrified, like I'd done something wrong. But next day she texted and told me the truth. She triggered a flashback from her experience being involved with Chad. He told me that a full 2 years before meeting me, she had been in a long relationship with a guy who was there for 10 years. And when they were emotionally, physically, or mentally abusive, Zas accumulated across the board during their intimacy, nastily belittles her, but afterwards offers a heartfelt apology. She had a flashback, but assured me that it was nothing to do with me. Prior to us living together, take things slowly since she was still in therapeutic treatment. It was tough, but because I loved her, no sense in it for now, and none ever seemed one again, so. A year later, we became engaged. The house about to be described was one we bought while engaged. Let me back up a little. It sure felt good to have a house with signal fire and phone service. I was fortunate enough because my uncle left me an inheritance since then to take us on. She thought that was a wonderful idea. Half kidding, I told her to go ahead and put wherever shells so grew instead of flowers. Now we can have a peach tree, metaphor for new beginning. We got married not long after that, and he says it was absolutely wonderful. Indeed, the marriage was not without its ups and downs and even pain. But I was grateful she advocated always clinging her man and tried never to go to bed angry with him if I ever did something that upset her. She gently pointed that out. Eventually, life happened and I was promoted at work. That meant getting more money, but also more travel for conferences and a whole lot of extra work except on planes idling my time away in airports. I noticed she was down and not as intimate as before. From then on, she kept her phone close in hand, even stopped gently speaking things that displeased her. I talked to her about it, but she said everything would be all right once we passed through this phase. Having no reason not to believe her, I let the matter drop. Sometimes she would go visit her sister and stay all night with her, saying she needed some girl time. The day I got the fateful phone call, she was supposed to be staying again in her sister S company. I remember rushing to the hospital. I hardly could even breathe. Frantically, I kept asking about my wife when the nicest and most understanding police officer sat me down like a father would with a child to explain what had happened. He said he was a friend of my sister-in-law and had responded to a domestic disturbance call. When he arrived, he found a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the woman, punching her while she screamed and struggled helplessly to break loose from him. This line of argument made no sense to me, since one, this had nothing to do with my wife because we were married, and two, everybody who knew my wife knew she would never do such a thing. "I'll tell you," the officer said, giving me a knowing look. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me to stay calm because the woman is actually my wife. If it hadn't been such a serious situation, I would have laughed in his face, but for some reason his manner made me believe him immediately. Then a nurse took me in to see my wife, and to this day, even now, I can hardly put into words how she looked. I just stood there, feeling as if I had been frozen in time, before a doctor hurried in and told me something about her injuries. Her jaw was slightly fractured. Her left eye was puffed out so swollen that you couldn't see any white at all underneath the lid. She had massive bruising covering half of her face, and more importantly, 3 broken ribs. The doctor dropped another bombshell: she was pregnant. It wasn't until my wife's sister caught sight of her that all of this finally came together in my head. When I first approached her, she tried to avoid me. However, her police officer friend finally gave her some encouragement, and she told me what she knew. As it turned out, my wife, SX, had contacted her 5 months before. Intending some kind of extrication or salvation, he was making his way from place to place in order that he might gain redemption. He wanted absolution for past errors of judgment more than anything else. Does anybody else smell a rat? She began to associate more with him, and then he had her go out for a coffee so that women could see how much he had changed. Naturally, this resurrected former feelings, and since he seemed different, it soon became an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice. She told her to take things slow and get it all out of her system if she wanted. It had only been too exciting. Then, 3 months later, a physical affair broke in on this idol. Even my sister-in-law said she was willing to take care of whatever bad habits, paralegal work quit bars could have cost money owed to my sister-wife. My sister-in-law was crying now, saying she was sorry because she didn't know about the abuse my wife had gone through. It was only her and the psychologist who treated everything as tell daughter. I just stood there in shock. I couldn't believe any of it, but at the same time found myself completely nonplussed by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up, it was the wee, small hours of the night before, and EU was there for her. She burst out crying hot tears the instant she opened her eyes and saw me sitting by the bed alongside her. Last few months, living in a state of zombie. At the earnest insistence of her family's teaching us, we went to individual counseling first for her and then became a couple under one roof again. Don T asked how this is possible, despite the two of us seeing each other. In counseling, she was surprisingly open about how it all happened and just how much she hated herself for causing me pain. She once said that he can even change your heart because she was starting to think back then, however this makes sense. She said she wanted to break up, but was too weak to do so, and it wasn't until she was pregnant that she truly realized what he had done to her. That was when any further connection between her and this man turned itself into a poison for herself, as well as for the unborn child in her womb. It seemed as if there could never be another chance of getting free from him or his disciples altogether. So she went to finish off the affair with him. At the end, he cracked and hit her. Suddenly, she collapsed into a half-dead thing. She was afraid of men other than myself, as the remnants of her old self suffered for it. At one point, she couldn't even go to the bathroom alone at night without my holding her hand. It's so pitiful. Last October, I started receiving frequent phone calls from the planning and development department in my town, and kept feeling slightly irritated for having to rush down to City Hall 3 times in just 1 month for something different every time. But what these clingy friends don't realize is that when one has children, both time and mood are precious commodities. Strive as best one may to help others, especially new acquaintances. These 2 things are not easy to come by. From his seclusion standpoint along the nearby riverbank below Bao Sunggun in Kangwon province centers, rather like Hong Kong or Singapore, always centered around ports, but a bit isolated from the cities by their own special industrial zones. A little sailor's joke, the irrepressible Mr. Yamada has finally emerged as a rich man. Having once inherited 1/5 of Honda Motors stock from his father, and thus able to laugh off living through long periods without food or clothing necessary for survival. In a land where 4 official seasons of plant life give work all year round, he once again hung out a shingle near Bundang. The best part of Wuchi, too, until recently, when there were orders for him to take down its mark altogether. Called her children S father, S surname. What was already short became shorter still. Now this is all right indeed. After the baby was born a son, by the way. We got a paternity test and he was mine. But the more I hanged around her, the more I realized that I didn't actually hate my wife, but rather loathed her. I could no longer see the woman I married, but instead saw this abandoned remains. Every time I looked at her, I decided to leave, since it was not a question of if I would regret doing something which led to nothing in return, aside from hers and her abusive ex. She had begged me not to leave, making even ridiculous offers such as giving me a hall pass or letting myself slap her should I want to. I think she knew at this point that it was time for me to get out. She was actually very generous during the divorce proceedings, moving back in with her parents and signing a co-parenting plan which the courts had drawn for her fast-forward 3 years, and I meet my now fiancée purely by chance. One day I was in a bookstore with a friend of mine, talking about Egyptian mythology, when this beautiful woman came up to correct me on the pronunciation of names from ancient Egypt. Needless to say, I was highly impressed, not only by her knowledge, but also because she is Egyptian herself. We exchanged phone numbers, which led to dating eventually. When I finally asked her to marry me, it was in front of the peach tree that I had planted with my own hands some years ago. After I got down on bended knee, but before she could answer my question, she fled the house for a moment and returned carrying an engagement ring as well. It turned out that she had been planning to propose to me after all, because she was hopelessly head over heels in love with me and couldn't bear the thought of anyone else holding on to my heart. My son, in his gentle, innocent way, told my mother all that happened because he was around when it happened. My ex actually turned up in the rain that night, yelling about how I could ask my bride to marry me in front of our tree and that this doesn't mean it is over between us now. I am entirely worn out at this point. I can go no contact because she is the mother of my child, but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I get her to move on, to not be so terrified of men and not force me to ask a lot for one? Now on to the next story, story 6. My worst fears were realized when my wife had an affair with her boss. Background. I always believed I was a good husband, a good father, and a decent man. My wife and I had been married for 10 years, and we have 2 young boys. In 2020, I landed my dream job in the military and moved my family to Hawaii. We started what seemed like a perfect life on the tropical island. After 2 years without working, my wife got a government job, and I thought everything was going smoothly until she began spending time with her boss. Let us call him Rick. Starting in early to mid-2021, My wife started mentioning Rick more and more, almost like a giddy schoolgirl when she talked about him. I couldn't help but notice it, and one day I snapped and told her to stop bringing him up so much. I have had insecurities about infidelity from a previous relationship, and during our dating years, I made it clear to my wife that cheating was my biggest fear. So when I confronted her about her relationship with Rick, I expected her to understand and ease my concerns, but instead, she just took it as me wanting her to stop mentioning his name. After that, she only referred to Rick along with another female coworker. Let S call her Mel. Around the same time, I began experiencing heart problems due to stress and ended up in the hospital twice. I started having heart episodes whenever I got extremely anxious or worried, so I began staying home more often. In March, as my wife was approaching her 39th birthday, she became more down on herself and started going out for happy hours more frequently. She'd come home in a good mood, then sit and play on her phone saying that the happy hours helped her escape. Then, on April 22nd, out of nowhere, my wife became more interested in our sex life. We started having amazing sex and bonding, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We began sending each other flirty texts and going on more dates. In May 2022, I caught a glimpse of a text exchange between my wife and Rick. The message said, "I want to see your back tattoo." I confronted my wife about it, and she immediately broke down, sobbing and asking for forgiveness. I told her this was inappropriate and reminded her that ID had issues with Rick since 2021. She promised to go back to just being friends with him and to stop texting and flirting. Foolishly, I told her she could remain friends with him. I guess I felt like I needed to save face. But I noticed Rick activated disappearing messages that same day. From that point on, I couldn't fully trust her, but I hoped things would improve once we moved back to the mainland. In June, we moved from Hawaii back to the mainland US. We stayed with her parents until we found a new home. During that time, our sex life remained great. I got a new job that allowed me to work from home and spend more time on the house, and she found a job she enjoyed. Everything seemed to be going well. Trickle truth. On September 22nd, my wife confessed that she had an emotional affair with Rick. She told me that a week before we moved, she confessed her feelings for him during a happy hour. A week after the move, she called him and told him she loved him. He apparently reciprocated. They continued chatting over WhatsApp and Skype at work. When I checked her phone, I found that she had deleted all the messages and his contact information. I completely broke down, spiraling into a pit of despair. I knew this was coming. She apologized repeatedly and promised to work on rebuilding our marriage and trust. She said she couldn't just get over her feelings for him, but would do everything possible to move on. I could see her trying, but I also saw the pain she was in. To prove to her how devastated I was, I took a photo of her, thinking I could show it to her later. A few days later, I started having intense urges to disappear and felt totally suicidal. I began medication to help manage these feelings and started to regain some control. By mid-October, things seemed to be getting back to normal on the surface, but inside, I still felt inadequate, and my self-esteem was in the gutter. I was going through the motions with my wife, buying fireplaces and planning getaways. I still felt empty but thought I could push through. However, one evening, I noticed something was off with my wife again. She confessed that she had seen Rick in August. He had family in the area and visited her. She took time off work to meet him at a park. She claimed she needed to see him one last time and wanted to be in a public place without alcohol. They walked around the park the entire time, and when it was time to say goodbye, she got into his car and cheated on me further. She insisted they only made out and nothing more happened. Hearing this, I completely lost it. I cried and screamed harder than I ever had in my life. Our kids, who were asleep, were woken up by my outburst. I yelled at her, telling her she had crushed my heart and scarred our children. Once again, she apologized repeatedly and begged me not to leave. At the end of October, I was going through her emails, trying to piece together what had happened, and I found a hidden email with his phone number, titled Maybe. I confronted her again, and this time I was teetering on the edge of suicide, but thankfully didn't cross that line. She finally gave me the full truth. the truth I had asked for back in May and September. After that, she said she was completely over him and that any lingering feelings had disappeared. The pain I showed her seemed to snap her out of the affair as hold. Today, I've reported Rick to HR for showing preferential treatment and having an affair with my wife. I don't know what is going to happen next. My wife sent a note to his live-in girlfriend, telling her the truth about what happened. My hatred for him and the disrespect I feel is deep. Hawaii allows legal action against affair partners, and I am considering my options. I told my wife we can try to reconcile, but I haven't forgiven her, and I'm not sure I ever will. We've been more honest and possibly closer than ever, but the wounds are still fresh. We've started marriage counseling and individual therapy for my existing PTSD. I know this wasn't my fault, but looking back at the timeline, I wonder if I could have done something to prevent it. I know my wife loves me and she insists it was a mistake, but to me a mistake is a single action, not a series of choices. I want to reconcile and I want to give it one more try, but I mourn and grieve every day. Edit. She told her family and friends, and they've all sided with me, offering support. I've also contacted Rick's partner, who confirmed most of the same story my wife told me. I've checked through prior phone records, and the timeline mostly matches up except for the WhatsApp messages that are now gone. My wife isn't very tech-savvy, so if she took any photos, they would be on our shared photo app, which automatically backs up to my account. I am planning to go to her work and check her message history on her computer, unannounced, to quell any remaining doubts. I might even pursue a polygraph test just to be sure. I am confident the affair ended by D-Day 3, but I am still trying to understand the full timeline. Or am I just going crazy? Now on to the next story, Story 7. My wife slept with supervisor for promotion. Now he lost both his job and family. I am 28. And I recently discovered that my wife, who's also 28, had an affair with her former boss, a 35-year-old man who's married with kids. We have been together for 5 years now, and our firsts in love and life were all done with each other. We've known each other from our very childhood and now live across the street. It used to be 5 steps away after we just moved in together. She has been the only constant in my life since then. Just looking at both of us really shows how much love comes from broken homes. Every day I wonder whether it was we who changed things for the better. No, that is what I tell myself anyway. She had been working from home ever since I got my start doing so as well, but now the missus is back out at work. She is in a field where women are few and far between, and later she could tell me about how her place of employment was very much like a boys' club. The guy she had an affair with, her boss at the time, and now supposedly one of the good ones who watched out for her on job-related matters. It wasn't long ago at all that the wife got a promotion, and I was absolutely beside myself with joy. She had become a manager now, which meant assuming more duties than before in addition to needing several business trips per year. Her first trip occurred just last week from Wednesday through Friday. Before she left, I told her that cheerleaders at home would give impromptu performances. She told me on the telephone that she was leaving her heart with me. "Take good care of it," she said. That phrase she always uses when we are separated for long periods of time. Earlier this week, she came home from work strangely than usual, and I knew right off something was amiss. She looked very upset indeed, and there was a red mark on her right cheek. My wife is fair-complexioned, so bruises easily, that I asked her what had happened at once, but all she said was "hold me," and then she nestled close to me. It was only after a few minutes that she got up from where she had sat me on the couch and told me what had happened. My whole world. She admitted that she slept with her ex-boss when this business trip took place. For me, it was even difficult to understand at first. It felt as though I were watching someone else's life collapse. Or perhaps she would reveal that the whole thing had been nothing but a giant joke. Actually, I think a dirty prank would have been preferable. I was in a daze and said not one word while she confessed this. Cheating strikes a particularly raw nerve with me, as it does with many people. When my father had an affair, my own family was torn apart. It was I who caught him and told my mother. Even now, my relationship with Dad is strained because he still blames me for destroying the family, never forgiven me. And she knew all of this. She knows too well how my family was wrecked by infidelity which was enough toffee words for her even to think about letting me go. She even supported me as a teenage boy over this issue, and now she is doing the same? Apparently the matter came up on one occasion when the man's wife discovered it and challenged him and my wife at their own place of work. This turned out to be quite a scene, with employees and customers looking on, partly out of amusement but mostly in sheer astonishment. The woman called my wife white trash and slapped her across the face. After that, some employees stepped up and escorted the woman out of the building. My wife telephoned her elder sister afterward. She needed to tell everything she admitted to her sister, but I just sat there speechless. She said something to me. The only thing I was able to think of asking was just what did happen on that business trip. The other evening, she explained to me she went out drinking with the other team leads and stayed out late as she thought she had to join in for team bonding. As one guest after another left until only she and her former boss were left, he suggested going back to his room for some music. My wife went along with it. He kept on flattering her, saying how lovely she was, and that if he were me, he could not help but caress her. At long last, he kissed her. My wife asserted that she was not thinking properly at the time and allowed him to go right on kissing her until they made love. I just couldn't bear to listen to any more, so I stood up and told her to cut it out. When she reached out to take my hand, I pulled it away and told her not to. She began to cry. She apologized again and again, pleading with me for forgiveness. She said that she felt it was the biggest mistake of her life. She hated herself for it and wished she could undo everything. "I only love you," she kept repeating. "There's nobody else but you." The alcohol had also confused her sense of values. "She really needs to leave," I told her. "Go call your sister to pick you up." She got up, still crying, and endeavored to embrace me. But I moved away from her once more. She kept exhorting me not to do this, suggesting she should quit her job or let me have full access to her telephone, see a psychiatrist. But I couldn't bear it any longer. I told her if she didn't go, I would leave. I didn't even take time to pack a bag, I just walked out of the house. Seizing my arm, she tried to prevent me from departing, and she was still begging for mercy after all that we'd been through. Heartrending in any case to think of her like this, as I left her behind weeping. It was as if my heart were being torn from my chest because I still love her. I loved her more than I ever thought possible to love another person. But she wrecked me. She destroyed everything we had built up together, everything we might have had. Driving to my mother's place, where I am staying now, I do not know how I managed to make the whole journey without breaking down. As soon as I arrived, however, I burst into tears. I don't think my own mother has ever seen me cry, not since I was a little boy anyway. The only person who has ever seen me cry is my wife. When I visited my mother, I simply told her what had happened and tried not to hide anything I couldn't see. She felt the same as I did about it. They've always been close. She treated my wife as though she were her own child. She left judgment to someone else and only told me that she was welcome in her house for as long as it took me to get set up again. After I left, my wife has been constantly calling and texting me, but I haven't answered. The texts beg me to go home. They beg me to talk to her. They beg me to say where I am, and they beg me not to give up on her. I feel so very lost and hurt. I thought I'd known suffering, but nothing compares to actually living the experience. I never thought my wife could take that approach. I'd always thought the saying, "once a cheat, forever a cheat," was true. It would have meant obliterating a relationship. However, I keep wondering whether I should give us another chance, whether to live in counseling, rebuilding the future out of our collective past. I can help but keep thinking about our history, how much I love her, how we always fitted together so perfectly, and how when I really had noone else, there was always her. This week has been the most agonizing of my life. Nothing seems stable anymore as everything crumbles around me. I am struggling through this alone as my wife, my best friend and greatest source of support, is no longer by my side. Doubt had been growing in my mind, so yesterday I decided to reach out to the other person hurt in all this, hoping she could provide the clarity I so desperately sought. She had no reason to skew the truth or withhold information. I searched for and found her on Facebook, sending a message requesting we talk. She responded swiftly, offering a video call. I agreed to speak with her right away. Even before a word was said, I could see in her eyes she shared my affliction. She told me how after being removed from their work last Monday, she tried contacting me but could not find my information. Apparently, one of the last things she said to my wife was that she intended to tell me everything. As she said this, I recalled my wife rushing home that day and her sister insisting I hear the news directly from her. I asked if she knew more about what truly happened on the work trip, or if it was truly just a one-time mistake, and how she came to discover the deception. What she divulged confirmed my darkest fears their relationship had been unfolding long before that trip. She showed documented proof, texts revealing profound emotional infidelity. Sharing her screen with me, I could barely maintain my composure viewing what was exposed. She explained that last January she noticed her husband withdrawing and losing interest. On a few occasions, she saw him messaging my wife purportedly about work, but he hand-waved it as nothing of import. The day before their vacation, when bringing him something left behind at the office, she found him with my wife, standing close in an intimate manner, joking and smiling in a way that seemed flirty. Upon noticing her arrival, they abruptly separated, with my wife appearing panic-stricken while her husband pretended all was well. That was when she knew something untoward transpired between them, though she opted not to immediately confront him, wanting irrefutable evidence he couldn't weasel out of. Following their trip, her husband distanced himself further and dismissed her advances. That night, awaiting his slumber, she inspected his phone. Within his text thread with my wife laid everything intimate exchanges preceding their vacation. It began as emotional infidelity, with AP professing inability to focus at work around my wife's presence. The messages evidenced AP initiating pursuit of my wife, though her lack of rebuttal mattered not. Some texts prior to their trip saw AP disparaging his wife, lamenting her repeated miscarriages. It was revolting how he spoke of her to my wife. Repeatedly, he asserted perhaps needing a woman like my wife. There were Thursday evening drinks, invitation texts to my wife, and morning messages evidently denoting they copulated. My wife thereafter ceased responding. I found myself at a loss, unable to escape the turbulence of the situation. With care not to stir her sleeping children, she maintained a guarded exterior while inner turmoil raged. Though anger simmered just below the surface, confrontation would wait. Humiliation was to be had on her terms and in a public forum. Monday's light would bring her plan into action, laying bare wrongs for peers and patrons to judge. While intention had built over time, chance alone exposed the damning scene to another wronged wife, and retaliation knew no bounds. Attempts to stem the tide went unheeded as wrath poured forth. Targets broadened beyond the primary culprit to all complicit in betrayal. OBS then explained to me that her husband displayed no remorse after their confrontation, only fury towards her public outburst. I learned from her that AP was terminated the next day after the incident. One of the hardest things she ever had to do was sit her twins down and tell them everything, trying to explain it in a way they could understand. I knew exactly how she felt, remembering my own mother's anguish following my father's betrayal. OBS said this whole ordeal exposed her husband's true colors, and while he pursued another woman, my wife still played a role in their affair, and as a woman, she had no empathy or esteem for my wife. I told her I didn't fault her sentiments, that she deserved to feel however she wanted in that moment. She apologized on behalf of her husband's actions. I paused, searching for the right words, then expressed regret over my wife's part in it all. She said we are now stuck in a club together, a club our spouses unwillingly inducted us into against our will. She asked about my wife and I's current situation. I replied that honestly, I didn't have a clue about our future, but that I wasn't staying with her for the time being. She wished me the best going forward, and I did the same for her in return. Before hanging up, we swapped contact information in case either of us ever needed someone who understands to talk to. Every raw emotion I had been feeling only intensified tenfold. I confided in my mother about what I had learned during our discussion, and though she still didn't pass judgment, I could tell she was upset with my wife too. A whirlwind of emotions raged within as I contemplated AP's downfall. A twisted sense of satisfaction emerged that his indiscretions had ravaged his life and health, though such vengeful thoughts brought me no pleasure. Immense guilt weighed upon me as well, for an innocent wife now faced losing her partner while her children's stability crumbled. How their young hearts would ache in the days to come, forced to reconcile all they held dear disintegrating before them. Against my wife, too, simmered anger, for her betrayal had not only destroyed our solemn vows, but jeopardized my well-being. Our intimacy following her return offered no reassurance, as texts from that trip hinted at careless acts, leaving me vulnerable to unknown risks. So many lives damaged by reckless actions, and in the wreckage, only more hurt would be found. Now on to the next story, Story 8. Wife confessed to having an affair with my best friend at Thanksgiving dinner at S30 a.m., and I am sitting here, pouring my heart out on a throwaway account because everyone I know is on my main. In the still of night, my thoughts race as I process the turmoil of recent events. Yesterday was Thanksgiving, yet instead of gratitude, I feel only betrayal and despair. The discovery that my wife of many years, who had been my anchor since our teenage years, engaged in an act of infidelity with my closest confidant has left me reeling, shattered to my core. Questions swirl with no answers in sight. How could she violate our sacred vows? What sin did I commit to deserve such a stab in the back from my so-called friend? As the first light of dawn begins to illuminate the gloom, I know only turmoil, yet somehow I must find a way to carry on. To provide some context, my partner and I have been together since our high school days. When I initially met her in 9th grade, she happened to be dating T, my best friend relevant to this anecdote. Back then, T and I were acquaintances, though we weren't particularly close. After encountering her, I swiftly became enamored. I spent all of my freshman year silently hoping that she and T would cease their relationship so I could get an opportunity. Ultimately, they did, and in 10th grade, I befriended her and asked her on a date. Our bond became one of the best things that occurred to me in high school. Her presence got me through what was otherwise a fairly challenging 4 years. Since they were merely freshmen when they dated, T didn't appear too troubled that I was dating his ex, even granting me his permission when I questioned if it was acceptable. By senior year, T and I had become close comrades, and there was no sign that he held any resentment toward me for dating his former girlfriend. The three of us ended up attending the same local state college, where I kept my relationship with my wife strong and maintained a close friendship with T. There were times when it became rather evident that T was still attracted to my wife, like when I caught him gazing at her during gatherings, or when another friend told me that T had confessed he wanted to be intimate with her. While it bothered me, I understood that my wife is very attractive, and it is natural for other guys, including my friends, to be drawn to her. As long as they didn't make a move, I didn't really care. But it was obvious T was very attracted to her. And over the years, he made sly comments about how fortunate I was, and even once joked about the form of her ass. 10 years ago, we were fresh out of college with our whole lives ahead of us. Now I find myself settled with a family of my own, a son, a daughter, and a faithful wife at my side. Meanwhile, my old friend T has faced tumult, recently divorced and sinking into a deep depression. These past few months have been challenging as I strive to support him emotionally, but my work and own mental struggles leave me overwhelmed. Thankfully, my wife has stepped in where I fall short, listening without judgment as T pours out his troubles. Their bond was never strong in our student days, as my wife disapproved of T's womanizing ways. Yet her compassion seems to have mended old fences, and I note their changed demeanor when together her rapt attention to his tales, her laughter encouraging more, her queries as to when next they may meet. Her kindness heartens me, though an unease also stirs, one I dare not speak for fear of seeming a jealous husband. For now it eases my mind that in his lonely state, T has found an ear in her caring company. The evening had taken an unexpected turn of events. What started as a casual conversation over dinner had evolved into a heated argument about their financial struggles. Frustrations were running high as money had become a constant source of stress lately. As voices escalated, she abruptly stood up from the table and stormed out the front door, refusing to engage any further. He sat alone with unanswered questions swirling in his mind. Hours passed without word from her as darkness fell. Just when worry began to set in, the door creaked open and her disheveled form appeared in the doorway. Silence hung thickly in the air between them as questioning eyes met but found no explanation. Though itching for answers, he said nothing, too drained from the volatile exchange to delve further tonight. Some distance seemed needed to allow tempers to cool before hashing out where to go from here. Now, fast forward to fall harvest time. My entire extended family had gathered, along with some close friends who I had not conversed with for over a month. The feast was progressing pleasantly until an individual broached politics. T and I view the political realm in utterly opposing manners. He staunchly champions the incumbent head of state, whereas I embrace more liberal principles. Let us avoid politically charged discussions here, if agreeable. Typically, we steered clear of such topics, yet on that occasion, T insisted on debating at length. Tempers flared rapidly, and remarks turned uncivil, with T bellowing that my progressive stance denoted cowardice and a failure of my manhood. I inquired from where such an accusation originated, and he retorted that I seemingly could not satisfy my wife's intimate needs. The assemblage fell deathly still. My spouse and I never disclosed particulars of our relationship publicly, rendering me wholly shocked. The remainder of the meal proceeded in palpably awkward silence. The evening was winding down as guests started to disperse, leaving just the three of us behind. My friend and wife exchanged a look as I requested we speak, an unspoken secret weighing heavy in the air. Without prevarication, T met my gaze and revealed what transpired between them on that fateful day of our dispute. Words of intimacy were uttered under the guise of solace, walls crumbling as comfort turned carnal. Though my wife attempted protest at first, acknowledging the wrong, she eventually acquiesced to his advance. Their indiscretion was consummated, a betrayal that stole my breath away. Silence fell as I struggled to find speech, reeling from the revelation. After minutes elapsed without response, T took his leave, departing swiftly and without farewell. Alone now with the woman who vowed her faithfulness, tears welled as she conceded it was the gravest of mistakes. Explanations tumbled from her lips of late, the stresses of our lives wearing heavily upon her, leaving vulnerability that another filled with attention and flirtation. Though denying intent, she acknowledged allowing his implications to plant seeds of want, craving the diversion he provided in my absence. In a moment of weakness after our quarrel, weakness turned to wrongdoing. Commanding her hence, I withdrew to collect turbulent thoughts, not yet ready to comprehend how deeply the foundations we built had cracked. Refusing to relent, she followed to continue lament, but each time her pleas arose afresh, I shattered them with shouts for her to retreat, space the solitary balm I could bear in the aftermath of her misdeed. Now, as I sit here writing this, I find myself utterly crushed under the weight of despair. The mental image of my beloved in the arms of another shreds my soul like nothing ever has before. While every fiber of my being cries out to remain by her side as she is the very air I breathe, yet clouds of doubt shroud my mind. Can I truly believe their intimacy occurred just the once, a solitary slip born of stress alone? Or was it but the first of more to come, with lies yet to follow in its wake? I want nothing more than to preserve what we have built together these years, yet I flounder, waves of confusion tossing me upon uncertain seas. Kind souls, please lend me your counsel. How does one navigate waters so treacherous yet crucial to cross? Now on to the next story, Story 9. My daughter's drunken confession shattered my world. My disabled wife has been unfaithful. I'm not sure if this is the right place to talk about this, but things are getting so desperate. My wife and I have been together for 25 years since we met in high school. We've been married 19 of those years. We were high school sweethearts and have 2 great children, a son and a daughter. I thought our marriage was strong and different from those of friends and co-workers. Indeed, we would stand the test of time. How naive I was. My wife has been a homemaker for nearly all our marriage, something we both agreed upon. However, after the children went to college and this house grew still more silent, she began to feel as though empty nest syndrome was getting to her. She expressed how unfulfilled and lost in identity she felt. I tried to cheer her up and suggested we take up hobbies together, go out in new places, perhaps even adopting some puppies. At first, she readily agreed. Then suddenly, though soon she started to say that she wanted to be more and not just drift through life. I could understand this viewpoint and was willing to back her, with she not being a sitter-still person ever. She confided in some friends, and one of them assisted her in obtaining an interview at a real estate firm where she had previously been employed. After giving birth to both children, I would see the mother just as often in the nursery as ever, nursing and always tired. I was both excited and happy for her when she was offered the job. At first, everything seemed to go well, but she changed a little within the first year. She started going out after work for drinks with her colleagues, came home and texted endlessly into the wee hours of night, and began wearing different clothes which were more revealing than usual, though nothing you would classify as improper. In fact, she even started wearing a new kind of perfume. The reason I really began to get worried was that one day when I picked up her cell phone, I was not snooping, and just happened to glance over, see a message from a male colleague. The message was one that a woman might send to a man whom she likes, and had nothing to do with work at all. When I asked her, she seemed a little flustered, but assured me that they were just friends, and she would talk to this person about the improper messages. Not wanting to become a gaunt, suspicious husband, I chose to believe her and let it pass. Damn, how I wish that had not been my decision. As time went on, her conduct became ever more strange. She started talking about wanting to be spontaneous in life, and even tried some weed. I teased that she sounded like an older version of our children, but turned serious when she came out with this bombshell one night after she was drunk. She said she thought that maybe I was putting out her light. This completely knocked the wind out of my sails, and I felt like I was letting her down in some way, thus making every possible effort to improve our relationship, including arranging for counseling sessions, but to no avail. From that time on, her bizarre actions ceased. She said she was sorry for the way things had gone down, and that it was as if she had forgot who she was, but she just couldn't bear to lose what we had at home. She resigned from her job, and we had marriage counseling. It was hard at first, but things improved dramatically. Our marriage was better than ever for 2 years. She was more attentive at home, took the initiative in sex more often, and settled me with affection. The only hitch was her relationship with our daughter started going down the tubes. I asked my wife about it, but she brushed it off as just being a phase or woman thing. Once more, I believed her. Interestingly enough, during this time, my relationship with our daughter got better. She rang me up more often, met me for coffee or lunch during the week, and even gave me presents like t-shirts and so. I always argued it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I could see she wanted to say something, but was holding back. Tragedy somehow struck. One night, my wife was returning from grocery shopping when she was hit by a drunk driver. She lost the use of her legs and has been in a wheelchair ever since. Things became truly hard, and even suggested I sleep with other women, but obviously refused. I put it down to her depression and reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere because I loved her more than our circumstances. This made her cry, and she asked why I was so good to her or what she had ever done to deserve me. Once more, I thought it was simply her depression speaking, and did my utmost to comfort her. The doctor saw an enlargement on my wife's throat during a regular checkup, and it was larger than normal. In case it was cancerous, they needed a biopsy done of this lump in the neck. I couldn't think straight, but my wife just sat there blankly upon hearing it, wordlessly at first, and then laughing hysterically, saying this is my retribution for what I did. We finally calmed her down, but she asked that we go out to eat together as a family before the biopsy was done, so we did. I approved. We had our kids and our nearest cousins over. I talked about how my wife was my light in life and we would get through this yet together. However, I noticed that our daughter looked uncomfortable. It could have been because of the situation, maybe not. Later that day, my daughter called me when she was plastered, begging that I shouldn't hate her. Initially, I was bewildered at the thought, but I reassured her that under no conditions would I ever hate you, because you are the apple of my eye, and I will not disdain you ever. Then she told me that when her mother was away on business at the real estate company, her mother saved her own lover, whom I do not know the head person. This occurred during my wife's period as a real estate executive. My daughter decided to go on a driving trip with her friends, and so they stopped at a diner where they don't usually eat. But there she saw her mother kissing a man who was definitely not me. My relationship with my daughter apparently improved due to the decline in their relationship. My wife was in tears when she told me it was the coworker from the messages. She couldn't deny that either, and admitted it was far and away the dumbest thing she'd ever done. She said he made multiple advancements on her and finally got through her resistance. She told me that coveting my daughter's virtue was when she recognized what a dreadful situation had developed. She wanted to take it to the grave, as she had never wanted to hurt me in her life. She was just too cowardly of a person to confess, and therefore begged our daughter not tell me. I feel completely devastated by this news and don't know what to do. Every aspect of our relationship involves questioning today's date. 5 years ago, where did I go wrong? My wife tells me I am a good husband, that none of this is my fault. The problem is, since finding out about it, my feeling towards her has changed markedly. I still look after her, but it's more like a nurse looking after a patient than a husband taking care of his wife. Actually, for someone to leave her who that would be alone. Even if I leave her, she is totally stuck. Financially, emotionally, she's dependent on me for everything, and this just seems so unfair. Now on to the next story, story 10. My wife, who has been struggling with alcoholism and erratic behavior for 7 years, just admitted to cheating throughout our entire dating relationship. This story spans over 15 years. I met my wife when we were both 19, out at a club. We were both into partying and did a lot of it. Back then, I was in a friends with benefits arrangement with another girl, and I kept that going for the first few months of dating my wife. For the next couple of years until I was 21, we had massive fights and would break up, or at least it felt like it, and during those times I cheated on her again with the same woman. It was a terrible thing to do, and I always felt guilty about it. Eventually, I decided to end the FWB situation for good and give my relationship with my wife a real chance, even though I thought we might eventually break up. But that never happened. Our relationship grew stronger. We both finished university, I started a business, and she got a job. Things were going well, and I even took her to Hawaii to propose. A few months before the wedding, I started having serious doubts about getting married, mainly because of the guilt I felt about my past infidelities. Everyone, including myself, saw her as this sweet and innocent girl, which made cheating on her feel even worse. After a few tumultuous weeks, she said she still wanted to get married and that we could work through it, so we did. The next 7 years of marriage were incredibly difficult. And I don't mean just the typical marriage is hard kind of difficult. I mean things were seriously messed up. She fell into a deep depression and blamed it all on me. I was made to feel like absolute garbage nearly every day. All the love, romance, and connection between us completely died. Her drinking kept escalating, and I have been punched in the face more times than I can count. I've been bitten so badly that I needed medical treatment, stabbed in the head with a wine glass, and tortured with sleep deprivation. Sometimes we went months without sex, and when COVID started, she basically moved into the guest room for an entire year. A few months back, she tried to kill herself with medications and alcohol. I spent the entire Easter weekend avoiding my family while sitting with her in the hospital as she detoxed for a week, followed by 3 weeks in rehab. Since she has been out, she was supposed to continue her therapy sessions, but she hasn't gone even once and has started drinking every day again. Most of her yelling and screaming is directed at me, blaming me for hurting her so much and expressing how much she hates me. During the 7 years we've been married, she has had about 15 jobs, despite having multiple degrees, but none of them lasted more than a few months, mostly because of her drinking. So I've paid every single bill and expense for practically the entire time I have known her. I even give money to her poor family overseas. I'm always there for her and her family in every way, while she doesn't do anything like that for me. I recently bought us a really nice first house which I had to pay for entirely on my own, and now the time is approaching for us to start a family. The fear of the new house and kids sent her into a drunken rage where she got furious at me for not wanting to talk about what I did with my FWB. The main reason I avoid it is because after 7 years of being tortured over it, I hate talking about it and shut down immediately, especially if she's been drinking. I blamed myself for all of this. Afterward, I realized that by not being open and talking about it, she felt like I was lying to her. So we sat down and had a calm conversation where I just explained what happened. There wasn't anything new that I hadn't told her before. I was just more comfortable discussing it this time. We've had hundreds of drunken nights over the years, having deep conversations about our history and life. Many times we asked each other, "Is there anything else? Is there anything else I should know?" She always said no, but I never really believed that. I had accepted that she had done something and that I would never know what it was, so I just let life go on. But the next day, or maybe later that night, she let it slip that she had slept with another guy I didn't know about. When I pressed her on who it was, she told me it was her old boyfriend from another state, and it happened about a year before we got married. Instantly, I was reminded of a time when we were dating, and she had left her phone with me when she went home. She sent me a message saying something like, "Hey, I left my phone. Can you hold it for me? I love you. Good night." A few minutes later, an email notification popped up on her phone for a hotel booking confirmation. She was supposed to be at work. I went a bit crazy thinking about what was going on, so the next morning, I drove to the hotel near the airport over an hour away to see what was happening. I saw her car there, managed to call her room, and found her number. I stormed in there like a madman, trying to catch her in the act. There was screaming, security got involved, it was chaos. But she was alone, and I was forced to leave. She made me feel like a crazy psycho, claiming she just wanted some space from work and that this was the cheapest hotel she could find. I am such an idiot. So, as it turns out, I was just a few hours early, and this was actually the third time they had met up. She tried to explain that I couldn't understand because what they had was real love and affection and desire. She said they just wanted each other so much, and she didn't feel that with me. The days following her confession have left me in a state of shock. I couldn't believe it, but at the same time, I wasn't entirely surprised that she had cheated. What really cut deep was finding out that she was so in love with this guy while I was doing all the work of being a boyfriend, getting none of the real love or affection in return. Honestly, what a piece of trash he had to screw up our relationship despite having the whole world of dating apps at his disposal. He's getting married in a few weeks, and I am seriously tempted to mess up his life the way he has ruined mine. Anyway, I didn't get angry with her about it. I had cheated, so it only seemed fair, right? I just needed time to process everything. That was the beginning of what I now know as the trickle truth. Over the last few days, it turns out she was cheating most of the time we were dating and engaged. I understand that I didn't own her. We weren't married, and if she wanted to sleep around, fine. But it should have been equal. I just feel used. My friends always thought I was crazy for letting her go out clubbing without me, but I trusted her friend, who I also considered my friend. But apparently girls' night out meant going out to get drunk and hook up with whoever they could. So I'll probably never really know the full extent of it. But so far, this is what I've learned. She slept with 2 different exes during our first year of dating. She was having a lesbian relationship with one of her friends pretty much the entire time we were dating, and she even invited this friend to our wedding. These two would go out clubbing together and not invite me, so they could spend the whole night making out, being together, and then going home to have sex. She had another sexual experience with one of her other female friends. She slept with this old boyfriend 3 times, but she let it slip that he wasn't flying here just for her because he has family here. So who knows how many times they actually hooked up. She had unprotected sex with 2 different random guys in nightclub bathrooms within 6 months of us getting married. And basically, she made out with possibly hundreds of people whenever she went out without me. This is all she has told me so far, and I have no idea how I am supposed to deal with all of this. This woman has used me, abused me, manipulated me, and physically and emotionally assaulted me. I put up with all of it because I felt like I had done such a terrible thing to her, and she would never let it go. For 7 years, I have been constantly attacked for how my actions hurt her. She didn't even try to forgive me and move forward or make our marriage anything other than pain and misery. I can understand how she could do this to me. I get it, I was a fool too. People do stupid things, and it sounds like she had a real blast, so I really doubt she regrets any of it. But here is where I am really struggling. I was never wrong. Every single time I was suspicious and things didn't make sense was a time when something was going on behind my back. As you have heard, our marriage, especially in the beginning, was unbelievably bad. The hate she had for me, the lies. One time I found her booking secret hotels again because she had lost her job and needed somewhere to go. She had been fired and didn't tell me, and then used what little money she had on a hotel room for herself while we were really struggling financially and desperately needed a second income. Every single time she would let me down. So Ivy had a lot of suspicions during our marriage, and I'm finding it extremely hard to believe that someone who has lied and manipulated me nearly every day I've known her would suddenly stop just because we got married. She got away with it all. Now she is depressed and ashamed. She says she didn't know what real love was, but now, she finally feels it with me. She claims she loves me so much and that I am her entire world now. She says she struggled with her sexuality, being bisexual, and that she had to hide it. This is a bullshit excuse to me. I've always known she was bi and never held it against her. I would have been very open to exploring that with her. But she keeps using her sexuality as an excuse for what she has done to me while always reminding me that she would never be open to sharing me with someone else. A few months ago, she was telling me she wanted to go outside of our marriage to explore having sex with a woman, but wasn't he okay with me doing the same? But that is a whole other story. Anyway, that has been my last 7 days, and I'm not processing it well. If I'm not drinking, I just start breaking down. I have given this woman everything, and all she ever did was take and use everything against me. The only thing I know is that I don't really know anything, and I probably never will. I don't trust a word out of her mouth. In the past, she has used these kinds of stories to break me down for a few months, only to recant or tell me she made it up, which now I have to question as maybe none of it was made up after all. I've worked from home for years, and since she's an unemployed bum, she is around basically 24 hours a day every day, so I don't think anything has been going on for some time. But it feels like it's just too late, and it will definitely happen again. It was just so much, not just a few times, but an insane number of times. I mean, I'm sure it could get worse, and I am also sure it probably will. How could I possibly have a family with this? Obviously, there was so much I don't know, not that it really matters, I suppose. My two biggest issues are how I have been treated during this marriage. If what she says now is true, I should never have been treated the way I was all this time. The betrayal from someone I've sacrificed everything for. The last thing that happened was over 7 years ago, but it's not like those 7 years have been great. I was already ready to leave at the rehab stage because things had gotten so bad. Sorry for how long this was. If anyone got through it all, thank you for being there. This has been one of the hardest weeks of my life, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not holding up well at all. How do I survive this? I never feel like I'll be the same person again. Now on to the next story, story 11. My wife of 5 years admitted to cheating and is placing the blame on me. We're both 35, and next week marks 5 years together. We've known each other since elementary school, and we're kind of childhood sweethearts. We've been engaged for 2 years, but COVID made a traditional wedding difficult, so we postponed. Until a week ago, we were trying to conceive our first child. 3 days ago, I assumed she had gone to bed while I was reading a book. Out of the blue, she appeared, tears flowing down her face, and confessed, "I am so very sorry. Ivy cheated on you. I am certain many of you can understand just how gut-wrenching that moment is. Never in my life had I been hit with such an overwhelming storm of emotions, rage that burned white-hot, grief so deep it was suffocating, disbelief, hatred, even physical pain all crashing down at once. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just started throwing my things together while she trailed behind me like a desperate, lost puppy, pleading with me to speak. The only thing I managed to say was right before I left the apartment, "Thank you for telling me." I never thought I could hit a woman, but God forgive me. If she had tried to touch me during that moment, I might have lost it. I am so thankful she didn't. For the past 72 hours, I've barely slept. I'm devastated. I can hardly speak in full sentences. My mind is racing. My heart is constantly pounding. My mouth is dry, and yet I'm sweating. It hurts like nothing else. I have so much work to do with the end of the year approaching, a mother diagnosed with cancer to care for, and all I want to do is lie down and cry until I can TT anymore. Why do people do this? If you want to have your fun, just leave me. It would still hurt a lot, but at least you would be showing some respect for me, my dignity, and my feelings. I can understand how someone can be with another person and then come home and kiss me. Just writing this makes me feel sick. It is disgusting. She called yesterday, and after I composed myself a bit, I returned the call. We had a long talk, mostly civil. She explained that for the past 7-8 months, she hadn't felt wanted or like a woman. This is somewhat true. I changed jobs and faced a steep learning curve, so I was swamped with work and often exhausted. The situation with my mom also took a toll, so I admit that our bedroom wasn't exactly filled with passion for a while, and that's on me. She gave me a few details. Her partner was another man with a wife and children, someone she met at work. It happened only once. They used protection, but it was planned, not some random drunken encounter at a bar. She knows that I am not the kind of man who can forgive or forget infidelity, and she is right. It is a red line for me, and I've made that clear to her many times over the years. She said she couldn't bear to lie to me any longer. The affair happened about 3 months ago, even though she knew the consequences. She told me I was the love of her life, that she wanted to grow old together, and that she hates herself for what she did. She said she doesn't recognize the woman she became in that moment, but she completely understands if I never want anything to do with her again. Her only hope is that, if time heals and I somehow find forgiveness in the future, she'll have a clear conscience and one to be living a lie. I don't know what to think. I don't know what's true and what's not. I don't know if I am seeking advice, a kind word, or just trying to get this off my chest. It is just so painful that I am constantly screaming inside. Update. First and foremost, thank you so much. The fact that you took the time to read through this, despite hearing similar stories before, and offered guidance, resources, or insight, is overwhelming for me. That said, there are a few clarifications I'd like to add. We are not married, just engaged, so there's no legal bond. Thankfully, there won't be any divorce proceedings, lawyers, etc. When I said we were trying to conceive until a week ago, I meant we'd been trying for about 1.5 years. We both got checked out by doctors, and there didn't seem to be any issues that would prevent us from having a baby. But it just didn't happen, and I think this affected her more than she let on. She has a younger sister who recently got pregnant for the 2nd time, and while she was happy for her, I could see that it hurt her as well, like she was asking herself, what's wrong with me, us? Was it stress? Fate? Not enough sex? Bad luck? I don't know. She did communicate the issue to me, and we talked about it at length on a few occasions. I am not defending her, just stating the facts. We are very different people. She always said that sex was one of, if not the most important part of a relationship. For me, it is important, but not the top priority. I enjoy it, but I don't have a constant craving for it. So I can go a week or 2 without that kind of intimacy, but she finds that difficult. Apparently, I also had trouble expressing my desire for her, and she communicated that to me before the affair. She always said that sex with me was great. She never turned me down and often initiated it. But she said that even if I wanted her, she hadn't felt it for quite a while, and, in the end, felt like she was always chasing me rather than the other way around. That hurt her ego and feminine side, I guess. I have to admit that her assessment is mostly accurate. And here's the kicker. I think what prompted her confession was the fact that I had taken steps to be more proactive in our relationship, especially in the past month. I approached her more often, and we were doing well in the bedroom. I don't know if that makes sense to you. During our long conversation, she also expressed a desire to personally explain the reason for our breakup to both her family and mine. She has already spoken to her family. Her father called me yesterday. It was brief, and he essentially said, "I'm very sorry for how things turned out. You know I respect you greatly as a man, and I hope you two can find a way forward if at all possible." She's already reached out to my brother, who knows we've separated but doesn't know why, and they're supposed to talk today or tomorrow. As for my mom, it is a messed up situation, and it will likely become clear around Christmas, but she asked if I wanted to handle it any differently. Regarding the other guy and his relationship, many of you suggested finding his wife and explaining the situation to her, but that's not something I can do. My fiancée works at her father's family business, and this guy is with some kind of contractor among many others they deal with. I really don't have the energy or mental capacity to hunt him down and unravel everything. That's not who I am, and I'm genuinely afraid of what it might do to my sanity if I go down that rabbit hole. I don't know who he is and don't care. I don't know the state of his relationship and don't care. And I don't know any details about whether she was told, by whom, etc. I completely understand where you all are coming from, but playing private investigator and then going scorched earth isn't in my nature. Also, it might sound selfish, and it probably is, but taking that action would likely uncover things that would bring me even more pain, and that's the last thing I need right now. Reading back over everything, it might come off as mild and apologetic, but believe me, it is not. This is just how things are from my perspective. Everything between us is over, and just the thought of any contact with her repulses me. However, I want to present the situation as it is to the best of my knowledge, not paint myself as the ultimate victim, or depict her as some kind of demon. Hopefully, someone can learn something from the implosion of my relationship. Once again, thank you all for every word of encouragement and every piece of advice. I am deeply humbled. I'll try to update after a few weeks and share how I am dealing with the aftermath. Update 2. It has been about a week since D-Day. She called almost every day to check up on me. For the first few days, I was too numb and just mumbled yeah on the phone. Eventually, I realized she was taking me on her guilt trip and asked why the hell she kept calling. I haven't seen her since D-Day. One thing led to another, and the truth came out. Here is her final version of events. Why did she do it? She planned it as revenge against me, a pity revenge. She wanted to rub my nose in it for all the times I neglected her, for the times our bedroom was silent, for the times I looked right through her, as if she didn't exist. Her words, almost verbatim. She did it, and she did it more than once. Most of you were right, it wasn't a one-time thing, and she started to develop feelings for the other guy. Why did she tell me? She said she told me because she still loved me, that I was her great love and she couldn't bear to lie to me any longer. However, she made it clear that she still wants the emotional connection of the affair and intends to continue with it, and with him again, almost verbatim. But if that fizzles out, which she somehow expects it will, she hopes to come back to me with a clear conscience. Basically, she wants and needs the affair right now. But if somewhere down the line I could forgive her, at least there wouldn't be any secrets between us. Needless to say, I was stunned by this. The other guy's wife and kids? Against my better judgment and sounding like a complete idiot, I asked her about the status of his marriage. They were separated. Yes, I checked, and it is true they don't live together. Not officially divorced, but separated. My mom? She took it like a champ. God, I don't know where she draws her strength from, but in a time when I should have been her rock, she once again became mine. Mom, you'll never read this, but you're the best parent anyone could ever wish for. What have I done? I decided to quit smoking completely, my biggest addiction, give up alcohol, more of a social drinker, but still cut out energy drinks I'd been consuming a lot more in recent months, and restart my regular exercise routine. It has only been a week, but so far I've managed. How do I feel? I feel like crap. I barely eat, I barely sleep. It feels like I am in hell. All the images and thoughts come unbidden, overwhelming me, and I struggle to function at all. I'm a simple man who lived by simple rules: respect your woman, provide as best you can, be faithful. She bulldozed through my sense of self, annihilated my self-respect, my dignity, and my hope. My brother saw me the other day and literally begged me to get my act together, saying I looked like the ghost of a ghost. I've read many stories here since I posted mine, and honestly, you guys and gals have gone through far worse. I'm not married, I have no kids, I have a wonderful family and friends, and a decent job. Some of you have real horror stories, and I am absolutely humbled that you kept going while I just want to curl up in a ball and disappear. How the hell did it come to this? Update 3. It's been more than a month since D-Day, and honestly, there's not much to update. Some of you asked about her and her affair relationship. I honestly don't know and don't care. I haven't seen or asked about her. In January, we had only one brief conversation on the 5th or 6th. She begged me to call to sort out some final technicalities, asking about towels and blankets and other nonsense. I said, Are you really calling to arrange the handover of towels? Throw them away? Burn them? Keep them? I don't care. And that's when she, thankfully, destroyed any last remaining shred of respect I had for her. I called you because I felt weak, but dawned to take this as a sign of hope for us. That is when it fully hit me what a miserable liar and cheat I've been dealing with. Not only did she nearly destroy my life, not only did she manipulate me into thinking it was as much my fault as hers, but now she's dangling hope for us like it is something she controls. The sheer audacity. Some of you called her exactly what she is, a parasite. A parasite that took a good heart and turned it into a wasteland. Absolutely no contact after that. But I'll survive this, and I'll survive her. I'll get better, not today, not tomorrow. Maybe not even in a year, but I will. As for her, at some point in life, we all get what we deserve. When that moment comes, whether it's a week from now or decades later, I want to be there. Let fate sort her out in its own time and way. Now on to the next story, story 12. My 35M wife, 37F, just admitted that she cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend a month after we became exclusive. We've been together for 13 years. My wife, 37F, and I, 35M, have been together for 13 years, married for 10. We've got 3 kids, 2, 5, and 7 years old. Over the weekend, everything came crashing down, and I've been a complete wreck. I honestly don't know how to handle any of this. We met when she was 24, and I was 22. She was in a relationship then, a 5-year-long one, with her boyfriend at the time. We became friends through school, working on assignments together, totally platonic. I remember asking about her boyfriend, and she confided in me that their relationship was falling apart. They weren't intimate anymore, and he was emotionally abusive, criticizing her outfits, calling her fat, which she absolutely wasn't, and openly comparing her to other women he found more attractive. He'd even cheated on her a few times and started seeing other women near the end of their relationship. One day, she called me, just as a friend, to vent about everything. She told me her boyfriend had said he wanted to explore other women and thought they should break up. She was devastated, so I took her out for lunch, just to listen and be there for her. A week later, she called again to tell me he had officially dumped her and was moving out of the house they shared. Being a 22-year-old guy, I thought, perfect, maybe I could be her rebound and get with her. I know it was crappy of me, but at that age, I wasn't thinking about the long-term consequences. We started going on regular dates, even though she was still living with her ex. Our conversations were often about her breakup and the mess it brought with it. I'd pick her up from their house and we'd hang out. This went on for a few weeks, and eventually we slept together when I brought her back to my place one night. After that, I realized I really liked her, so I asked her to be my girlfriend. She was still living with her ex, who hadn't moved out yet, so I found myself dating someone who was still sharing a house with her ex-boyfriend. But I trusted her when she said it was over between them. She seemed to genuinely dislike him. Just to clarify the timeline, they broke up, and about a month later I asked her to be my girlfriend. We kept seeing each other, and I was there for her as she worked through getting him out of her life. He finally found his own place and moved out a few weeks later. Once he was out of the picture, our relationship started to feel more real, free of the drama that had been hanging over us. About a week after he moved out, roughly a month into our exclusive relationship, I planned a date night for us. We were supposed to meet at 7 p.m. at a restaurant. I texted her an hour before but got no response. I tried calling, but there was nothing. I ended up driving over to her place, but she wasn't home. I was worried but didn't know what to do. She called me at 11 p.m., apologizing like crazy. She said she'd been at a friend's place studying for finals and left her phone in the car, completely forgetting about our date. She felt awful. I told her it was okay and didn't think much of it. I trusted her and we moved on. A week later, her ex-boyfriend started harassing her with nonstop calls. She told him to leave her alone, that she didn't want him back, even though he was desperate to reconcile. It got so bad that he'd sit outside her house for hours. One day, I was there when he showed up, and she ended up calling the police. She eventually filed a restraining order against him, and we didn't hear from him again. About a year later, after a few drinks, she let something slip. She admitted that the night she was supposedly studying and left her phone, she was actually at her ex's house. She apologized, saying his mom was in town and she'd gone over to help him patch things up with her. She'd been close to his mom, so she agreed to have dinner with them and talk about their relationship. She said that after dinner, she went back to his new place with his mom, and the three of them kept talking. As the night wore on, it got late, and instead of driving home, she decided to stay over. I was obviously upset about the whole situation, but she assured me she had told him she didn't want to be in a relationship with him anymore and had moved on. She insisted nothing happened between them. Over the next several years, I kept pressing her about that night. It gnawed at me, making me feel insecure. Every time I asked if she had cheated on me, she swore she hadn't. She claimed she just went over there to talk, left her phone in the car, and fell asleep after I called her. She said she felt awful lying but was dealing with so much after her breakup that she didn't know how to handle it. But she never wavered. She maintained she hadn't cheated on me, even though I couldn't shake the doubt. We ended up getting married and having 3 kids. But this past weekend, I couldn't let it go. I pressed her one last time about that evening. I told her something just didn't sit right with me, even after all these years. It randomly popped into my head, and I asked her again, what really happened that night? I'm not sure I believe you or your story, it just doesn't make sense. She broke down crying, and in that moment I knew. She confessed that she had never wanted to tell me the truth. She admitted she did go over to his house with his mom, but after his mom left, they talked about their relationship. One thing led to another, and they ended up having sex on the sofa. She said she was confused about her feelings, caught between being 2 months out of a 5-year relationship with him and dating me. She hadn't processed the breakup and didn't know what she wanted, especially since he had dumped her but was now begging to get back together. She told me they had sex, and then she called me when I was frantically trying to reach her, worried sick. She ended up staying the night and went home the next morning. After that, she told him she didn't want to get back together, and they needed to stay apart. I know it all stopped after that because she clearly avoided him and even got a restraining order against him in the following weeks. But now, I am sitting here, feeling shattered. She confessed to lying to me for the past 13 years and had been gaslighting me the entire time. Every time I asked about that night, she denied anything inappropriate had happened, making me feel crazy and insecure. I had convinced myself I was just losing my mind, but now I know she did cheat on me that night. I keep telling myself that when we started dating, she had just been dumped by a guy she'd been with for 5 years, and I was a rebound. She was even still living with him at the beginning. I believe her when she says she hasn't cheated any other time and that it was just an overlap between her relationship with him and me. But that doesn't erase the hurt knowing she lied to me all these years, leaves me feeling confused and devastated. We've been together for 13 years, we have 3 kids, and we've had a great relationship otherwise. But this revelation is overwhelming. I'm even considering divorce. After 13 years, finding out that she cheated on me during our first month of being exclusive and then lied to me about it this whole time has left me a wreck. I know I need to process this before making any decisions, but I wanted to share this here to gain some perspective and clarity. She has been apologizing nonstop, reassuring me that she feels terrible and only lied because she knew it would never happen again. She realized after that night that she wanted to be done with him for good, and was just confused at the time, transitioning from a long-term relationship with him to a new one with me. She understands why I am devastated and keeps reminding me that she was young, hurt, confused, and didn't know what she wanted until after that night. I am certain she hasn't stepped out on our relationship any other time. If there was ever a moment to question, it was that one night when she disappeared and I had no idea where she was. After that, I always knew where she was, who she was with, and I never had any reason to suspect anything was wrong. Do I need to take a step back and work on forgiving her, or is this a deal breaker? I love her with everything I have, and we've built a life and a family together, but this is the hardest thing I've ever had to face. Now on to the next story, story 13. My wife leaves her engagement ring at home so she can hook up at work, all while still wanting to stay with me. The holidays were pretty good, at least on my end. We kicked off 2024 on a positive note. I hung out with friends after a hockey tournament on the first weekend of January, the 6th. while she went out with some colleagues, who she's starting to see as friends, last Friday, the 12th. She came home early Saturday morning, and we started what seemed like a good weekend with the kids, who are 2 and 5. I mainly work nights to make sure the little one is cared for and to take the older one to school. Once she's back from work, I head out for my shifts. I handle a lot around the house for her and the kids. I've been raising the older one since he was 17 months old. She has full custody of him, while the younger one is biologically mine. But Monday night, everything changed for the worse, or at least that's how it feels. Out of nowhere, she seemed to have some sort of snap and told me she wasn't happy anymore and needed time to figure herself out. She mentioned looking into therapy to sort out her thoughts. I was prepared to give her the time and space she needed. I even reached out to set up couples therapy since she brought it up during a calmer conversation that night. On Tuesday, she started taking new anxiety and depression medication. She said she'd been having anxiety attacks at work, mostly because she was thinking about our relationship and how she felt about it. This all came up after I asked why she had left her engagement ring at home, something she never used to do. That night, we tried to talk again about how she was feeling and what the next steps might be. At least I tried. But it was like talking to a brick wall. We weren't making any progress. We've had communication issues before, but nothing as bad as this. We've always managed to work through things and find our way back to each other. Wednesday rolls around, and once again, she leaves the ring at home. She said that wearing it just added pressure because she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. She said she didn't want to put it back on until she figured things out. We had another conversation that night, and while it seemed to go a little better, she still wasn't really engaged. These were the kinds of conversations she'd always wanted, me opening up and sharing my feelings. Yet it didn't seem like she was truly invested. By Thursday, the ring was still sitting at home, and we didn't talk much throughout the day. Even so, I was still hopeful we could get through this. I had already reached out to a couples therapist, looked into our benefits coverage, and was ready to take things seriously when she was. But that night, she didn't give me much. She went to bed early, right after the kids. Friday morning, I didn't hear from her again, and the ring was back in its original box. I didn't know what to think. I started my morning as usual, getting the kids ready and taking the older one to school. When I got home, I opened my computer and started searching the web, trying to make sense of whether what was happening was normal. Then, all of a sudden, her messages started popping up on my computer, one after another. It turns out she had been heavily sexting a coworker I'd questioned her about recently. I've been cheated on in the past, so trusting isn't easy for me, but I had trusted her until now. These texts were nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. I couldn't believe it was her sending those messages while I was at home with the kids, and she was supposedly finding herself. I kept reading every message, trying to understand. She said that nothing they were doing would affect her life more than it already had. Turns out, she'd been giving him oral during lunch breaks, going out to lunch together, and on Thursday, they finally slept together. Now they're planning a night out next weekend while I'm home with the kids. My stomach was in knots. I didn't know what to think. He's younger than her and doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's ready to take care of her, let alone 2 kids under 6, both with different fathers. I'm not sure what led her to this. When I confronted her about it, she said he'd expressed his feelings for her during a lunch, and things just escalated from there. When I tried to talk about it more, she struggled to admit what she'd done and still hasn't apologized. She's saying that this isn't the real issue, that what we need to focus on now is figuring out the next steps for the kids while she deals with what she's going through. She's also saying we need to talk more about it, even though I've been trying my best these past few days. She claims she didn't really think this through and went to bed early while I was still at work, trying to process everything. I asked if she was ready to end things with the guy, but she hasn't answered that yet. She wants to keep living together and even share the same bedroom, but I'm not sure I can get over this. We had everything we wanted and were set to get married in 8 months. Every part of me wants to try and make this work through counseling, but my closest friends and parents are telling me to leave, split the assets, and figure out custody. I can't imagine anything less than being with the kids full-time and raising them like I've been doing. Am I crazy to think I can somehow make this work while she's still working with the guy? Financially, I have a place to go. She doesn't. She said before I accused her of cheating that she didn't see anything serious with this guy and he's not ready to handle kids. She says we'll talk about it today when I get home. I'm torn about what's best for me and the kids. I can't imagine being away from them. Has anyone else dealt with a similar situation? Am I crazy to stay for the kids and try to make her desire me again when she's already said she doesn't feel that passion for me anymore, but clearly does for this guy? How could I trust her to go out again when I'm not there, or go to work in the same building as this guy? Does this type of situation ever work out? She always told me she would leave before she cheated. I was crazy to think she wouldn't. But it happened. She's the love of my life. I'm so torn and heartbroken. She's trying to spin it on me, saying, I pushed her to feel this way. I never thought she would actually cheat on me. Now on to the next story, story 14. My girlfriend talked me out of accepting a promotion, only to cheat on me with the guy who ended up getting it. This is a throwaway account since my main one has too many personal details. I just need to get this off my chest because I'm feeling beyond embarrassed, ashamed, and angry at myself for ending up in this situation. For context, everyone in this story is around 30 years old. I work as a facility operator, which most people would call a custodian, but I have some other duties as well. The guy my girlfriend cheated on me with, let's call him Ken, also works as a facility operator. Well, now he's a superintendent. I don't want to make this about race, but I can't help but think it played a role. For the record, I'm Indian, and my girlfriend Jen and Ken are both white Italian-Canadian. Jen has been my first real long-term relationship. We've been together for 4 years. Her parents have never been overly warm towards me. They'll engage in small talk for a few minutes, and that's about it. She's told me that they believe she'd be happier with someone more like her, and that if you were going to date outside your race, you could have at least chosen an Indian with money. I wasn't Jen's first serious boyfriend. She had 2 before me, both of whom were tall white guys, so I was different from them. I make decent money, but living in Toronto is insanely expensive. My base salary is around $55K, and with overtime, I can push it up to about $80K, though that requires working at least 2 or 3 extra shifts a week. A superintendent position opened up at work, which would involve managing the facility side of things for a cluster of buildings. The salary for this job was $75K, technically less than what I could make, but it would mean working fewer hours. I mentioned it to Jen, and she convinced me to stick with my current position since I could make more money that way. Foolishly, I agreed. I turned down the promotion and continued in my role, even adding another shift to my schedule. Jen used to drop by my work from time to time, so she knew the guys I worked with, including Ken. After I turned down the promotion, Ken was offered it, and he accepted. Then, Jen suggested that I take on even more shifts so I could earn more than the superintendent, which I stupidly agreed to. I was working my regular Tuesday to Saturday, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., plus an extra shift from 2 or 3 p.m. until 10 or 11 p.m. 3 times a week. It was exhausting, but I did it to save up for a condo in Toronto and to impress her family. We were renting a place together and had just signed a lease until February of next year. Jen was thrilled that I was working so much overtime, even though we weren't seeing each other as much. I thought it was strange, but I figured she was just happy we'd be able to stop renting when our lease ended next year. She even encouraged me to take on more overtime, 4 or even 5 extra shifts a week. And like an idiot, I did it. Was completely exhausting myself, working 16-hour days, 5 days a week. But the more I pushed myself, the happier Jen appeared, so I kept going for as long as I could. Then one day, I fell ill and left my shift early, probably around 3 or 4 p.m. When I got home, Jen was in the shower, having just returned from work. I figured I'd surprise her when she finished up. He looked shocked to see me, and I was just as shocked to see him. He tried to play it off, saying he thought he was going to someone else's place and must have gotten the wrong door, but I knew that was bullshit. Jen must have heard something because she came running out. She pretended she didn't know him, but the looks on their faces gave it away. After seeing that I wasn't buying it, she tried to blame me, saying I was working too much and never had time for her. We ended up having a huge shouting match. I had given up the promotion, only for her to sleep with the guy who got it. Ken offered a half-hearted apology, but it was clear he didn't mean it, considering he'd been seeing her for a while. I'll admit, I didn't have much energy for intimacy, working as much as I was, and it should have been a red flag that she wasn't interested in sex lately. They admitted the affair had been going on for about 3 months, right after Ken accepted the promotion, and just before we renewed our lease. Jen even admitted that Ken was exactly her type, and that her parents would love a guy with the title of superintendent. Now I'm stuck renting this place with Jen for the next 10 months. We've obviously broken up, but neither of us wants to leave because we don't want to pay the rent alone. I don't even know how to end this post. It's just so messed up all around. There was no good reason not to take that promotion. I only didn't because she talked me out of it. That's 100% on my dumb ass. I spoke to the landlord on Thursday, and he had a separate conversation with Jen. I'm paying for May, and after that, I'm officially off the lease. I've secured a storage unit and will be packing up my things. Most of the furniture was bought by her parents, so I won't take any of it. It'll just be my clothes, personal items, and my computer, work desk. Apparently, Ken is moving in at some point, so the landlord will still have 2 tenants paying the same rent. My brother and his wife have generously offered to let me stay at their place. They're not charging me rent, but I'll have to help out with the yard work, mowing the lawn and weeding in the summer, shoveling snow in the winter, that sort of thing. So the good news is, I'm out of the lease without much penalty at all. A lot of people suggested I contact HR about this, so I did. There were a few misconceptions I want to clear up. All the times Ken turned down overtime shifts and I picked them up, we were both facility operators. He wasn't a superintendent yet. Since he became superintendent, he's working on a completely different cluster of buildings, so he doesn't oversee anything I do and doesn't assign my overtime. When I told HR what happened between him and my ex, they basically said they were sorry about the situation, but there wasn't much they could do. I'm still next in line for any superintendent positions that come up, but it might be a while before another opportunity arises. They did say they could add a note to both of our work profiles, making sure we can't work together and that he won't oversee me. This was pretty much what I expected from HR. I think screwing another guy's girlfriend is frowned upon, but it's not against company policy, especially since it didn't happen at work. Lastly, Jen called me last night saying she missed her period. It's 2 weeks late. She hasn't taken a pregnancy test yet, and it's probably too early to know for sure anyway. I told her we haven't done anything in months, so if she really is pregnant, it's a good thing Ken's making superintendent money now to support his kid. Then I blocked her number. The apartment is still half mine until June 1st, so I don't need to let her know when I'm entering my legal space.